Hi, I'm Carolyn Barnwell, and I direct and produce with StoryKeep. And I've also been doing work in the nonprofit space and with mission-driven organizations for over 15 years with organizations like National Geographic and World Wildlife Fund and the TED Prize. And the focus for me has been impact media. And there's a really cool connection with StoryKeep in terms of impact storytelling. And I just wanted to dig into that for a minute, because often when people think about impact, they're thinking about social good or influencing policymakers or some kind of social or environmental issue. And with StoryKeep, it's actually like the same level of professional media production in terms of what you would see on TV or Netflix. But we're looking at the impact in terms of the family dynamics or the family values. So instead of some social issue out there, it's really about articulating the culture in the family so that it can influence future generations, create some kind of really beautiful legacy piece, not just some little cute, nostalgic, like family photo album, but something that really is emotional and speaks to the heart of what the family is going to want to preserve and pass on. So if that's something that feels interesting and charming to you, for your family or a family that you support, we would love to hear from you. Please be in touch.
Hello, welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this podcast. First, let me say how delighted I am to have you join us for the show. You're actually here for the kickoff of our second season. We had an incredible lineup of guests in our first season. And if you missed the stories of our first 14 episodes, I invite you to visit storykeep.com/podcast. You'll find conversations with Tom McCullough, Freda Hertz-Brown, Dirk Junge, Josh Kenter, and so many more great folks. This season, we're shifting our format slightly to expand our focus. While we'll continue exploring the lives and legacies of our guests' loved ones, we're also turning the lens on our guests themselves, their reflections, the legacies that they are building, and the connections between the past, present, and future. This evolution is an extension of our mission at StoryKeep, where we harness the transformative power of storytelling through film to document not just the lives of those that we've lost, but also the evolving stories of those living. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, crafting meaningful and immersive films that celebrate shared narratives, which deepen connections and honor the ongoing journey of life. In each episode of this show, I now ask my guests two central questions. Whose life story from your family would you most want to see documented on film? And how does your family story shape your own personal and professional legacy? Today, I'm honored to welcome Whitney Kenter to the podcast. Whitney is the founder of Glowe, a consulting firm that she created to help leaders embrace who they are and achieve transformational growth. At Glowe, Whitney and her team work with leaders on strategic planning, culture and values alignment, personal executive coaching, and team development. But today, Whitney is stepping into deeply personal territory. She'll be speaking about her mom, a relationship that has been anything but simple. Whitney and her mom share a complex history marked by moments of disconnection and misunderstanding. Yet, through meaningful conversations and commitment to understanding her mom's journey, Whitney has found compassion and gratitude for the woman who shaped her in profound ways. Their paths, while similar, diverged at key moments, with each woman choosing a different road. Whitney now sees these differences as opportunities for reflection, growth, and connection. From her childhood as a self-declared circus ringleader living on a Kansas farm where bales of hay became elephants in her mind, to her current role as a leader helping others shine, Whitney's story is a testament of finding purpose in unexpected places. This episode reflects our expanded focus on both the legacies of family members and the legacies that our guests are creating in their own lives. All right, settle in and join me for this intimate and thought-provoking conversation with Whitney Kenter as we explore the enduring influence of her mom's journey and the legacy that Whitney is building for herself. Hi, Whitney. I'm so delighted to have this time to sit with you and hear about your mom and also you. It was so wonderful to get to know you a little bit in preparation for this. So lovely to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So let's start with the first question of the show, which is, whose life story from your own family would you most want to have documented on film? And you were a bit reticent with the answer to this question. And I kind of want you to talk about who it is and why it was like, a question mark in your mind.
It was a complicated question, even though didn't sound like it. It was complicated for me, I guess, to answer. But that person for me is my mom. Diane Huddleston is her original maiden name. And then she was Diane Myers with my dad, and now she's Diane Adrian with her second husband. So, but we've had, I would say, a very complex relationship. And it's only been recently that I've, I guess, come with more compassion and curiosity to this relationship that has been so, I would say, challenging for me. So, wow. But I'm glad that this is, the timing of this has worked out really interestingly, I think.
You mean the timing of coming on the show and sort of speaking about your mom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
you, in your line of work and what you've chosen in founding Glowe, you've been working with other people about their stories, their family cultures, their dynamics, and talk a little bit about doing that work, and then in the background, as we all have for our own lives, like the relationship with your mom and how that has sort of transpired for you.
Yeah. So I spent pretty much 25 years of my career working in the ultra high net worth wealth management space and having the privilege to work with many amazing families. And my focus and my passion was always around their family's culture and how do they better communicate and understand each other. And because the money was really just a tool for other things. And so I have spent a lot of years helping develop, how to make that more systematic, because in that industry, it's more about the numbers and less about the soft things or the harder to quantify things. Mm-hmm. And so that was an amazing learning experience for me. And then 5 years ago, decided that, wow, there is this kind of global awakening happening where people are pausing and saying, who am I? And what is my purpose here? And thinking differently about themselves, which is also, I think, having them think differently about the relationships that they have. And I think that's where it was the combination of having done all this work with other families, not having ever really stepped into that in my own family. And then also now we're working with people individually, collectively, and in businesses to just have more self-awareness and think about that. And it was really this last year of reflecting on this with myself and doing a lot of work with myself that I've really then reflected on this relationship. And I thought, I know a lot of people very intimately and deeply, having done this work for so long. And yet I felt like the people closest to me, I don't have that same level of understanding. And so that caused me to go inward, and then also then reach out to my mom and say, I don't really know you that well. Like, I know you, but I don't know you at the same time. So I'd love to get to know more about your story and how you got to this place. And I found myself really reflecting on all the judgments that I had
about her and about her life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I had never really gotten as curious as I needed to get in order to really figure out, like, where is that judgment coming from? And is that again, is that a me thing or is that a her thing? And like, what is that all about?
Mm-mm. As much as you're willing, what were those judgments? What was the story? What kind of transpired on kind of like the global level between you and your mom where you you felt disconnected?
Yeah. So one of the judgments was that I was that she was just jealous or somehow like not as supportive of me as she was to my siblings. And it was almost like because I was doing things differently, perhaps the thoughts that were going through my head.
Your own
I chose a different path. I chose a different path. I chose different decisions. And therefore, she's judged me. And therefore, because my siblings, were from my perception, closer to her and did more things that were in alignment with what she wanted, that they had a closer relationship. And so I had this judgment like, well, I'm just the black sheep. I'm just different. And I think that was this very strange awareness last year I was like, wow, we've actually had more things in common, but the choices that we made about those similar situations were very different. And and it was almost like, I think about that movie Sliding Doors from a long time ago, where it was like, you get to a moment and you have a choice to go this way or that way. And, um, and I think, I've had very parallel moments in my life where with my mom that I would say we chose different doors to go down.
Yeah.
And I always thought she'd
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I always thought that she didn't respect or appreciate my choices because they weren't the same as hers. And again, that was the story I had told myself for a long time.
And what were two of those or three of those major doorways, let's say, or moments, decision moments that stand out for you?
I think one of them was how we handled, so both of us had chosen husbands that my husband was abusive in multiple ways. My dad was abusive primarily emotionally with her. And so we both chose these relationships, even though we were both, I would say, very smart, very, beautiful, very strong people. And we yet found ourselves in these relationships where we were, kind of man down and always subservient, I guess, in a way to these men. And I had the opportunity, or I chose the path of getting out of that when my kids were very young, like 3, 5, and 6. And she chose to stay in it. And I still haven't quite talked to her as much about this, but she stayed in the marriage until all my siblings and I were in college or post-college. And that is such a different, and there's parts of me that when I reflect on, would that have been better for my kids, having one holiday in the same household and, all of the different things. And yet I know for me, it was such a better, I would not be the person I am today if I wouldn't have left him and figured out who I was. And that was really what it was. And then I think the other thing is, so how we handled the recognition that we were in these unhealthy relationships would be one big thing. And then I think it's what we did after that. I think she wanted so badly to find love and, all the things. And I did too. And it could have been the timing because my kids were so young, it was like all of a sudden here I am on my own and I'm a mom of 3 kids and I was always the breadwinner. And so I had a career and all these things. And I had all these things that was kind of like, okay, and I need to figure out who I am. like I actually does really know as a person because, and so it was hard to think about, well, how do I parent if I don't know who I am? And, so it was like this self-exploration work started for me, in my 30s that I think for my mom didn't start to really happen. I mean, I think, and again, these are things that I still need to explore with her, but my perception is that that wasn't able to happen for her until much later. And now that I'm basically her age when she got a divorce, I'm like, oh my gosh, starting in my 50s to figure out who I am. I mean, I still feel like I'm still figuring that out, but the starting point would have been very different than when I was, 37, 38, something like that. So,
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for being courageous enough to share that about your own, ups and downs and hard times and decisions. I just want to say that maybe I didn't tell you this before, and also with the folks listening, that you are the first guest of our show who's talked about someone who is living, which I also think takes so much courage. But I imagine that comes partly by the fact that you've had a conversation or a few at this point with your mom, trying to better understand, her life and her, her decisions, and setting aside, what you've already been able to discuss with her. If there was an opportunity, for an outside party to sit down and try to document your mom's life story, the first question is, what do you think she would say to that invitation? And the second is, what would be, the top questions on your list that you would say, please ask my mom this?
Yeah. So I think she would say, I don't have a story worth sharing. For sure, I would almost bet money it would be something very close to that.
How much money?
Yeah, I know, right? How much do we wager on this? And I think a lot of people feel that way, because if you're not famous in some regard, like why would you share that story? But so I don't think that's an uncommon answer. And then what was your second question about?
What would be your questions? What at this point, if you had an opportunity to have someone else talk about, talk with her about her life, what you would want them to ask her?
Well, so as part of my discussions with her of late, she has an amazing story. I mean, some of them are kind of hilarious, like different things along the way. But I think that kind of that looking back to see, when she was born, what was happening in the world and how that time influenced her upbringing. I mean, she made some really bold choices to work during high school. She was an amazing student. She's ridiculously smart. And yet she also had to work, but that was not easy like it is for my kids to go to work because they have their own car and they go to work and things like that. She had to go and get on a bus and go and then wait for a bus to get her home and then do homework late at night. There's a lot of grit to her story that I didn't fully appreciate as I've started to uncover that. So I would want to know more about that grittiness, because I think there are more things. And I think that's a theme in her life that I know I haven't appreciated, but I'd like to have that documented. Like there's so many things. And also
what experience has built her character.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also, I'm curious. I mean, because I think about this too, and people have asked me in the past, like, well, if you could go back, would you have married your husband and things like that? And I feel like it was I think it was a defining soul moment for me. I mean, I think my soul chose him for a reason. I think I needed to learn some lessons, and I believe that that's one of the things that I was here to do. But I would love to know, like, from that place of introspection, what she feels her soul was here to do, and how has she reflected on the journey so far, and how her soul has evolved. So those are the things that I'm thinking about. So maybe that's maybe that's just something that I'm projecting onto her.
Yeah, well, that's normal. Normal. And are there any, and you don't necessarily have to go into the details, but are there still things that you're confused about in decisions that she made or ways that she was during her life that you would want to know about?
There are, I think I, and again, like through her, I'm reflecting back on myself, and I think about my own decisions and big decisions when I've made them from a place of fear rather than making them from a place of, um, I guess, confidence and, you know, just more courage. And not that she didn't have courage, but I think that oftentimes, I would say, especially today, I see this where the fear just kind of takes over, the fear of, well, it's safer to take this job, or it's safer to stay with this person or go be with this person, you know, because it's what I know. I recently just sat down with someone that I've known for 15 years, and they're very unhappy and miserable. And yet when I asked, I said, so what is success? Well, it's the devil that you know. I'm like, yes, I get that. And I lived in that world. And so, but I also know what it's like to, when you start working on yourself and you start seeing things, you're like, wow, this is so not aligned at all with who I am. So it's not the absence of fear when you go and make that other choice. It's just, it becomes more aligned. And so I would want to know, I just think that for her, that's where I've seen her make more decisions based on fear, and I get it. It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's been, luckily for me, I made some different choices.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's turn to that, because I think it's so beautiful that you're sharing a little bit of this more challenging history. A lot of people, when they come on the show, and understandably so, they sort of talk about someone who they really want to elevate and appreciate, and there might be some complications, but mostly it's a celebration. And I think what you're speaking to and talking about your relationship with your mom is likely more common for people than the other way around, right? How complex and sometimes troubling, the closest relationships are in our lives. And so
Yeah.
I'm really, really impressed that you are bringing that forth in the work that you're doing with leaders now. And I assume that's part of sort of your own personal and professional legacy. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what personal progress, have you spoken a bit to this, but what personal progress you felt like you've made in your lifetime? How would you describe, a significant piece of personal progress that you're proud that you've made?
That is a really big question. There's so many ways. I think, kind of as I mentioned, I think that until I had the, I guess, realization of the type of marriage that I was in, and also finding the support and the courage to do something different, I feel like I was just kind of on the hamster wheel. It was just things, life was happening to me, but I wasn't really as engaged, because it was just kind of all very, it was momentum based. It wasn't as, choice based. And so, or I guess aligned choices, I would say. And so I think the biggest progress for me has been really diving into who I am. And I say this so much to people: do whatever it takes to learn about yourself. Learn as much as you can. Go as deep as you are willing to go into all the, I definitely as woo as there, as you can get. And I have I think, tried almost everything, but it's in pursuit of this exploration of myself and my soul's purpose here, and how can I best serve and how can I best help others. And so I think that my drive for self-awareness and, how that's translating into aligned choices in my life has been the single biggest progression ever. And when people tell me, well, it seems so strange that you just started this new company, at the height of your career, you jumped industries and you're doing something completely different. And my response to that is, number one, it was more in alignment. Number two, it didn't feel like as big of a leap as I think it seems from the outside. I mean, yes, different industries. Yes, I'm doing things differently. And yet, there's a lot of similarities. And so it gives me more comfort. Not that I'm not scared from time to time about these choices that I've made and things like that, except I've noticed that when I come back to, why did I make this choice? Why am I doing this thing? Why am I doing that thing? If it's in alignment, it feels safer. And I think that's part of, my evolution, and then sharing it with other people so that they can make more aligned choices for themselves is like my biggest to date gift and progress, I think.
Yeah. Well, that seems like an absolute necessity in doing the work that you're doing with leaders to help them do that, right? How would you define the sort of your biggest hope professionally in the legacy that you want to keep at this point? And I know you've sort of, like, as you said, you've jumped careers in a sense, and you're now working with leaders and their teams towards transformational growth in whatever form that takes. And I'm wondering what's your biggest hope of the legacy that you leave as a professional?
I talk a lot about how it's just time to change the system. I mean, I think there's a lot of leading indicators that are showing kind of this new way forward, and yet there's still this clinging on to the old ways because, kind of like what I talked about before, it's what we know. And yet there's so many things kind of urging us to do things differently. And I'd love to be known as, or love to be remembered for that person that helped people get across that bridge. Because right now it feels like crossing the bridge to what? And yet sometimes I feel like what we're doing is bringing things back to basics so that you can find that alignment, so that you can find more ease, so that you can find more growth and more opportunity. And so in some ways it seems counterintuitive, like, yes, I'm talking about changing the system and all of those things. And to me, in a way, it's coming really back to basics. And so I would love to be known as kind of this creative visionary who's like, okay, yes, I created this thing to help people cross this bridge. And in some ways it's like, yes, but it's so simple. It's really just making things less complex. And how do we do that? So, but I hope to gather more people. I mean, what we're seeing now is there are people, we call them Glowe curious. They're like, well, that's interesting. She did it, or she's helped these people do it. And so what would that mean for me? And now we're starting to have more people who are, wanting to do this work, which is great because I want this to be something that other people want to come help, to do. That's how we're going to have the impact. So.
Can you give an example of, and no need to give away, personal details, but an example of someone who sort of started in that kind of, like, as you say, curious space of kind of being in the old system, as you've talked about it, and you've been able to guide them across the bridge to a more aligned place? Like, where were they, if you could kind of describe that before and after in what you were doing with them?
Yeah. I think it starts with just trying to think of a couple of different examples, but I think some of it is helping them to understand their real gifts and superpowers, the things that really come naturally to them. And how do we translate those gifts and superpowers into the role that they're in today? And how do we shift that? I think there's this perception that, let's take the CEO role as an example, that the CEO role is a one size fits all CEOs, are the same. They have this, same air about them. And that's not true. And it depends on the company and what the legacy of this CEO is and what do they want it to be. And they can bring all their authentic gifts to the table and make the role what they want it to be. And I think some of it has been kind of breaking down some of those well, I should be able to be this and I should be able to be that and I should be able to do this. And it's really just kind of has been this unraveling of asking people why. Why do you think that? And why do you think that's necessary? And why is that necessary for your company and your business? And how do we get you in a place where you can be the most aligned with yourself in this role? And then we do the same for the other members of the team. I mean, I think there's just been a lot of pressure on people to think that they have to, in whatever role, whatever leadership role they are, they have to be great at absolutely everything. And instead, if we leaned into the things that they're truly, innately, just naturally great at, how much better that would be. And that does create a better team, right? Because you have a bunch of people who are working together. They more than likely don't all have the same gifts and superpowers. And that's a good thing. You shouldn't want them all to be the same. And so I think that's been helping people kind of acknowledge that and then really ground in that and figure out how to translate that into their role so that they can then glow, and then that shifts to their team. Because I think the best part of this work has been, once people lean in, the glow curious to, okay, I'm going to go down this path to glowing. It's very contagious. They want it for other people. They want it for other people on their team. And that's kind of always been the design, to have it be that kind of contagious, because then people are bought in at a different level. It's not people are being told they have to go do this thing. It's coming from a place of like, no, this has been so impactful to me.
True excitement.
Trust me, like, you're going to want to, lean into this work.
And because your personal journey and the work that you do is so connected because it's aligned, I can imagine that your personal legacy that you want to keep has some that you want to leave has some relationship with the professional one, but perhaps it is a different color or shade. What is the personal legacy that you want to leave or to be remembered by?
I think I had a hard time thinking through this one, actually. It's easier to think about professional than it is myself. I think about it in relationship to my kids, I guess. And I think about, I want them to understand how courageous the different parts of life, even if the only courageous act was to choose self-exploration and self-awareness. I want them to understand how important that is, because it's so easy to get caught up in what other people are doing, what other people aren't doing, and get into the relativity game. And yet, we're here at a very interesting time, and it's really important that we all go inward. So I want to value, I guess that's the personal legacy, is I want people to value that inner exploration as much as they seek knowledge and skills and things. Those are also very important. And I think that we've missed culturally, we've missed that the education of ourselves and going deeper internally is as important as all those things that we're seeking externally to understand.
Wow. I can imagine it's quite a doozy for people when they first start working for you to like kind of start to peel away the onion layers and say like, okay, what am I really doing here? Right. And as you said earlier, it's sort of going back actually to those original building blocks, to simplicity when you talk about your personal legacy and you think about it through your own children and what you hope that they, grow up feeling, or, the impact that you had on their lives. That is very much the same impact, really, right? Of what you would hope a professional who's working with you, a leader or a CEO, to say, okay, let me give myself the opportunity to actually go back to, in a sense, my child self, my curious self of
Yes.
what am I here for, or what intrigues me, right? Which is kind of like the scent that leads me down the trail of some kind of intuition. I don't know if you would put it that way, but that's sort of what I take from what you're sharing.
That's absolutely right. And I do think that's one of the things that we do try to go back to, is because we don't start with, so what's your purpose? I mean, I think that's a really big question, and a lot of people shy away from it because they're not sure where to start. And so we try to kind of take little bites at it. And one of those things is, so what did you love to do when you were a 7 or 8-year-old? Like where did you spend your time? What were you doing with your time? And things like that. And that somehow gets the wheels spinning on, oh, I loved cooking, or I loved this, or pretend playing this. It's very interesting. I feel like it's one of those where, you have this moment of, oh, I see how that translates to what you're doing. And when I see you doing this so naturally, like, oh, that all makes sense now. It's such a privilege to be in that seat, to kind of see it all. And because I don't think that it immediately is seen by the person who I'm speaking with. Like, I see it almost immediately. I'm like, oh, whoa, oh, wait, hold on. Okay, now I see all these things. And so so I have to be that mirror to people, and just help them see themselves a little bit differently, which is an honor to do that.
Yeah. Well, when you shared with me that something about sort of your own childhood, that you grew up on this farm in Kansas, and that you would, in your imagination, you would make the bales of hay out to be elephants, and you were sort of the ringleader, that going back to your 7-year-old self, you were, kind of like, okay, folks, we're going to do this whole circus.
Yeah.
And bringing all those, wild beasts into the ring. And in a sense, that's kind of the folks you're working with, right? Those big cats, so to speak. And what can they do here, in the show of life? So I think your message rings true. As a final word here, kind of going back to the original place of talking about your mom, now she's still living, so you have the opportunity to say this to her live, but sharing with our listeners, like, what would you like to say to your mom, given, everything you sort of reflected on today?
I would like to say that no choices are mistakes, and they all help our souls and those around us to grow. And all those choices have had a positive impact on me, whether I liked them or not at the time. But I think that's I think the perspective that I have now is very different, and I'm so grateful.
Well, I urge you to tell her that live if you get the chance. I'm sure you will, given your spirit. Whitney, it has been a total delight talking to you. You have made me think. You have made me wonder what kind of CEO I want to be. You've made me wonder again what I was doing when I was 7 years old. So I very much urge anyone listening to this to check out what you are doing with leaders and their teams, because you're clearly doing your soul's purpose. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. This has been really a powerful experience for me. So I'm very grateful to have been on your show.